Now we're going to move on to discuss some of the challenges that are posed by sampling. So if you'd like to turn on your microphone and camera, Rick, we can watch your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Just thank you for the impressive bio as well. When I was working for a large organisation that had 14 offices, that was a few years ago now, and I'm actually, my consultancy has about 30 staff and consultants working out of 3 offices, but minor change. Okay, so thank you for that, Sam. That was great, and it's interesting looking back and see how things have changed moving forward. Certainly changed a lot since I started doing clearances and air monitoring in 1986, so showing my age a bit. But so this morning I'm talking on, or my presentation is on current sampling challenges for workers removing asbestos or working with asbestos for compliance with the control limit. Excuse me. Okay, so the content of my presentation, I'm going to cover what the regulations say, the purpose of actual personal air monitoring, HSE published fibre concentrations, the work activities that are published, RPE, assigned protection factors and maximum usage concentrations for the RPE. Which is changed, and again a landmark change for me and for most people working in the industry was actually the Howie report. Thank you, Robin, for the Howie report in 1996, which showed that the assigned protection factors weren't actually as they were thought to be, and it introduced wet asbestos methods, which has saved a lot of lives. And will do going forward. Sampling process, what flow rates we're going to use, and I'm going to talk about problems encountered with sampling on site, the role of the analyst, how the analyst has to, and the removal operatives have to cooperate with each other, and what the future may hold going forward. So Regulation 19, so the employer has a duty to carry out regular monitoring of employees' exposure where the control limit may be exceeded. And when work processes change that might affect that exposure, then the situation has to be reviewed. And any records have to be kept for medical records for 40 years. In accordance with Reg 2, in all other cases for 5 years. Excuse me. The employer must carry out a risk assessment under Regulation 6 and must consider the results of monitoring exposure in accordance with the Regulation 19. And if the results are and those results are required. So when we're looking at Regulation 17, so the Regulation 7, the requirements to for the employers to have a suitable and sufficient plan of work in order to prevent or reduce exposure under Regulation 11, the results of any monitoring have to be included, and the plan of work must stipulate what personal monitoring will be undertaken and then what stages in the process. So this is the ACOP to Reg 19, and it stipulates what records must be included, what information must be included. So the type of work being carried out, the type of samples, the personal sample, the date and time of sampling, the duration, flow rate. If it's a personal sample, the employee's name, the task being performed, and again, the new analyst guide, it gives more guidance on what, how the tasks are recorded. The category of RPE that's being worn, the length and time of exposures of individuals, the measured fibre concentration, fibre type, names of organisations carrying out the sampling and analysis. So when I was putting this together, I had a look at Regulation 18, and I did some forensics on the HSE's website, the licensed contractors. So as of, I think, Monday, that there were about just under 400 licenses that have been that are currently valid. And when the HSE issue a license, all licenses have to have a standard condition attached, and standard condition 1 is that the person with a license must make a copy of that available to any client they're going to work for, or in any quotes or tenders. And you get different types of license: a standard license, scaffolding maintenance license, so that's maintenance of air extraction equipment, and ancillary license, and supervisory license. So when I did a count, these were the counts. There were 0 supervisory license holders that are documented. Now, in about 2007, just prior to that, there was a lot of companies, analytical companies, had supervisory licenses, and they were project managing, controlling work, writing specs, and they could go into enclosures and do personal monitoring. So one hurdle we have it now is that no one's got these supervisory licenses, so analysts can't go into live enclosures where they're likely to exceed the control limit without under Reg 22 having medical surveillance, medicals, etc. Which I'll go on to talk a little bit about later. But so asbestos license condition 1 is notifying clients of the license. License condition 2 is notifying the HSE, 14 days, and then license condition 3 is having a suitable and sufficient plan of work. Okay, and then with scaffold license holders, they apply condition 7, which means you've only got the license for putting up and taking down scaffolding. So personal monitoring for scaffolders should be pretty straightforward. You put a pump on an operative and you watch him put scaffolding up. It gets more complicated if they're putting scaffolding up in it decommission to form part of an enclosure, decommissioning power station or large boiler room, etc., where it's contaminated from the outset. Maintenance license condition 19's applied, and that says that the license holder has got the license only for maintaining asbestos extract equipment. And in the personal monitoring we've done for companies that got a maintenance license, it's pretty straightforward, and they're repetitive tasks. And part of the condition 2 for maintenance license holders is that they don't have to notify every job, but they notify where there's going to be a change. Okay, and the monitoring we've done, these companies, they've got some caravans or trailers that are bespoke, they're purpose built with the 3 stages, and they've got a work area with a giant vision panel, and you can see the guys working there and taking filters out of vacuums, and they've got a pre-filter pod that's extracting it 1,000 cubic meters per hour, and they get pretty low levels, and it's a repetitive job that they're doing, so that it's easy. You can see exactly what they're doing, and you can make appropriate notes on their their personal monitoring record sheets. So another interesting thing that came to light was the asbestos license condition. The HSE can put a license condition 9, which says that personal monitoring shall be carried out at every job until otherwise agreed in writing. So they, until sufficient information has been accumulated to allow reduction of monitoring at representative jobs only. And I found two companies with license condition 9. And I presume that is because perhaps they're doing work that's slightly different to the norm, where each job may be different and needs to build up sufficient information. I'm not sure. It might mean they've been naughty. I'm not sure, but that's just up for discussion. So LARC, the licensed asbestos removal contractor. So they're and non-licensable asbestos contractors, they need to cooperate together with the analyst to have some meaningful results. It's relatively common to find personal monitoring has been carried out, but it's little or no use when compared to the actual requirements. And I know in the past I've been on jobs and people say, oh, do some personals, you know, in the area, and you don't always know what's required from an analyst's point of view. But certainly the focus should be on the highest risk activities, and I liked one of your last slides that Sam, which showed, because you can visualize, and it showed the peak activities, and these ones that should be focused on more than, you know, construction of enclosures and fine cleaning of enclosures, etc. So the LARC must not leave it up to the analyst to decide. So the purpose of personal monitoring is to check effectiveness of the control measures. So if they're using wet injection, that it's working and they're not getting elevated levels because it's not wetted adequately. To provide data for personal exposure records, which is statutory, and a guide to guide assessment and planning of future similar jobs. So we can rely on information that's effective on previous jobs for similar job planning, and to confirm that the appropriate RPE has been chosen. So you know, you're wearing your full face fan assisted mask, and the work's not going to exceed the maximal level for that, or perhaps where they're sheeting up in areas where there's asbestos pipe lagging, it's encapsulated and in good condition. Their risk assessment may say, well, actually, they can sheet up using half masks, but you know, we've done personal monitoring on many of these jobs, and we've never exceeded, not even anywhere near the control limit or the maximum use for the mask. Now, these are from the published figures, fibre concentrations v work activities, and these are straight from the licensed contractors guide. And it's interesting that good practice, controlled wet stripping, so wet injection, up to 1 fibre per mil, unless you've got dry patches, of course, but careful removal of whole AIB, up to 3 fibres per mil. That's careful removal of whole AIB. So what it's saying here is that basically, with appropriate controls in place, potentially removal of AIB is 3 times more dangerous than potentially than removing of controlled, you know, lagging using controlled methods. Now, I look at plans of work where they have to stipulate the exposure, the likely exposure, and I often see exposure levels of 0.03, which is 300 times or 100 times below that 3 fibres per mil. So I often wonder if the previous monitoring has been meaningful. And of course, if you've got wet patches and you're not wet in the bad practice dry stripping, which was common up until 1996, the Harry report, as I mentioned previously, but up to 1,000 fibre per mil dry stripping. So there's published figures on work activities. And when we look at the protection factors for the mast, so this is taken from, it's an excerpt from the contractor's guide, but it actually comes in essence from HSG 53. We're looking at a protection factor of 40 for the full face mask and 20 for the half masks. When I started in the industry, we were told the protection factor was 1,000 for the half mask and 2,000 for the full masks. Protection factor offered now assigned to breathing apparatus is actually 2,000. Okay, so when we look at the maximum fibre usage for the mask, we're looking at if you exceed 4 fibres per mil in the work area, then you're going above the control limit in your mask. Okay, and for the half masks, it's half of that. So if things change on site, if personal monitoring finds you're getting higher levels that were anticipated, then they have to stop the work, reappraise the risk assessment and put something in place to reduce the fibre levels to as low as reasonably practicable. Okay, and we had this exactly on a project last year where they were moving AIB from a warehouse, and the anticipated fibre level in the plan of work was exceeded by far, because they had to actually, there was no option but to score and break the boards to get them out. And the personal monitoring showed fibre levels of 3 fibres per mil. The work was stopped, reappraised, and the job continued with them using breathing apparatus, because that's what the employer had to do to reduce the fibre level to as low as reasonably practicable. This is from the old existing analyst guide, which I know Sam's going to talk about a lot more later today. But sampling rates for the 4-hour control limit is 1 litre per minute, and up to 4 litres per minute for the 10-minute. That says control limit, but it's actually in the new publication it will be the STEL. Now, if we look at some practicalities, we've got operatives working in an area, bagging up, and this chap here to the right in the top, we can see that his personal monitor, it should be facing down, and the cows, the tube snagged, and it's actually pointing sort of almost upwards. So we can have an issue here. If we look in the bottom image, the operative standing up to the left, he's spraying vigorously in the area. So there's a good chance that filter could become damp, okay, and become unreadable. They're breaking out concrete that's contaminated beneath with residues from spray coating, and obviously that can generate high dust levels. So reporting compliance, HSE will expect the sampling periods to be as close as 4 hours as possible, okay, as is reasonably practicable, and the records the results are to be recorded as time weighted averages, TWAs. Okay, so we could sample for an hour while an operative's removing ceiling tiles, say, and if we get, say, for example, 4 fibres per mil over that hour, for the next 3 hours, if he's wrapping waste and bagging up and they get 0.2 over those 3 hours. We've got a total of 0.6 plus a 0.4, which is 1 fibre per mil, and then we divide it by 4 to get your time weight average of 0.25. So problems encountered on site: high dust loadings, wet damp filters. 2 of my analysts I spoke to this week, asking what problems they've had over the last year or so. 2 of my analysts reported that she said one operative dropped my personal sampler into a bucket of water, which rendered the filter unmountable. And another analyst said that the operative was passing the personal sampling pump out, and he very kindly decontaminated it, but was a bit overzealous with wiping the cow with a sponge, and water managed to drip in, and that to go back to the starting block. So it's also that we have issues with analysts recording activities, and analysts may have training issues and need retraining when it comes to what their remit is when they're doing personal monitoring. It's not just sticking a pump on an operative. And here's an analyst on the outside of an enclosure, walking along, looking through various vision panels, trying to decipher what the operative who's got the personal monitor on is actually doing, so he can record it. We have challenges with interpreting results. We have challenges with collecting the data. So the slide on the left is the image on the left under the microscope, and we can see the dust loading is incredible on that, compared with the dust loading on the filter to the right, and both of these personal sampling filters were taking in the same enclosure, but during different work activities. The issue we have if we don't go into enclosures is the image on the right. Everything's brick walls to go in, and the image on the left shows a CCTV camera, and we're asked to turn up and do some personal monitoring, and we've got to suss out where in the enclosure they are, and have help from the supervisor to guide them around the various cameras in the enclosure. And the new analyst guides state, personal monitoring, take photos through the vision panel, and that couldn't be done. And this is a photo of and this is a reason why that slide was over occluded, and it was taken after the 4th stage. So moving forward, the analyst guide is going to give specific information about what needs to be collected, detail the tasks and activities carried out, long sampling periods, and should be represented of the full range of activities. There's a new template for personal sampling results that's going to be in the new analyst guide, and that includes certainly the sampling, the activities that be carried out while the sampling is being done, and includes photos of the work area taken through vision panel. So what might the future hold? We've seen the control limit tumbling over the years, and is that trend going to continue? Is it going to reduce any further going forward in order to protect for worker protection? If it does, if it halves, that means that AIB won't be able to be removed using the full face fan assisted masks. We may have to look at BA for that. And how would that logistically fit in with removing AIB from bath panels and ductwork in domestic houses with full BA compressors and everything like that? And if the limits of detection are lowered, is electron microscopy going to be introduced for air testing and clearances? And again, you know, there could potentially be, well, there are issues there with time delays and costs on projects. So thank you for your attention. And any questions?
Thank you so much, Rick. That was quite a disturbing thought that so many people are not sampling properly and putting themselves at risk. And we are going to hear from Mavis Nye later in the conference, who I'm sure will be a familiar name to many of you, who's a campaigner for mesothelioma. So, and we're all well aware of the risks posed by asbestos. Adam Binney has asked a question: are there any situations where personal monitoring might be considered that are not directly in relation to the asbestos removal or surveying process?
Not directly, but yes. We've done a personal monitoring on people, for example, who have to maintain services in maybe maybe you've got a 1950s large 1950s building with 10 floors and their service shafts running down the floors, and they're potentially contaminated, but the essential maintenance tasks have to be carried out. Then we've certainly done personal monitoring and obviously training people in not licensable work, but in PPE, RPE, and assessing whether they're actually being exposed, doing these maintenance activities. So yes, Adam, certainly, yes.
And Colette's added, do you think the use of electron microscopy, easy for me to say, is practicable or achievable for removal works?
I know in some countries they do it, but I don't think it. I don't personally think so. Because the turnaround on electron microscopy samples, you know, is 1 or 2 days. So in the domestic sector, that certainly wouldn't happen. You know, the knock-on effect on tenants, moving tenants out, etc., for that long, because normally, you know, most jobs in domestic houses can be done in 1 day. They get in at 8, build the enclosure, strip out the bath panels or the panels, ducts, whatever, and then they get the clearance, and then the tenant can move back in. Yeah, so it certainly would give some challenges to duty holders.
And then Adam's added, so could you envisage personal monitoring of use for network rail track workers carrying out routine maintenance? Yes,
I would, and I think if there's if there's a potential issue with asbestos in track ballast or historically, I think it's an option. Possibly, you know, probably more an option in tunnels rather than just personal monitoring in the open air. But it's task specific, really. So yes, potentially yes, Adam.
And then Rob Blackburn said, is there a clear distinction between data required by UCAS air sampling and the LARCS data needed for a valid personal sample?
Well, this is interesting because the analyst doing the fibre counting has to be accredited to ISO 17025. However, I do know that some LARCs can do their own personal monitoring and then send the samples off to be counted by an accredited organisation. So that's an area for discussion. Obviously, the regulations say that the people doing the monitoring have to be competent to do it and work to the standards of the ISO standard.
And then Alan Graham's asking, what are your thoughts on analysts requiring to produce plans of work to cover surveys, 4SCs, etc.?
We do.
Two-word answer, perfect. That's been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us at the conference. I can now ask you to turn off your microphone and your camera. Thank you very much.
Thank you.